I guess the first thing to know about me is that I wasn't the type to just give up on anything. I'd built my life on resilience, on seeing things through, and on building a marriage that could stand up against the inevitable trials life throws at you. I thought that's what Ella and I had. A partnership, a friendship, a bond that went beyond words or the years we'd spent together. In my eyes, our marriage was strong because we were strong. So, on our 7th anniversary, I wanted to make it special. I had a full day planned, all about taking her back to where it all began, reliving our favorite memories and celebrating what we'd built. I'd booked the same small, candlelit bistro where we'd had our first date. I even tracked down a wine from that year, hoping the taste would bring a smile to her face, a glimpse of that girl who'd captivated me. But when I woke up that morning, Ella was already out of bed. No note, no happy anniversary. She didn't even come back until noon, claiming she'd been running errands. That day felt off. She seemed distracted, staring at her phone more than usual, and when I suggested we get ready to go, she hesitated. I tried to ignore it. I kept reminding myself that we'd been together for a while now, and maybe the little gestures weren't as big of a deal to her anymore. But deep down, it felt like more than that. That feeling grew when she declined the bistro dinner, said she had a surprise planned instead. That surprise was him. The surprise wasn't what I had expected. Ella told me to stay in the living room while she went to answer the door. I thought maybe she'd arranged something special, a dinner or some friends dropping by. I was still trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. When the door opened, though, it wasn't a friend. Standing there was her so-called work friend, Nick. I'd met him a handful of times, enough to know he was confident, loud, and always a little too friendly. Something in his eyes just never sat right with me, but I pushed that thought aside for Ella's sake. Ella didn't seem to notice the confusion in my face as she ushered him in. She looked nervous, almost jittery, as she glanced between us, saying something about how Nick had stopped by to celebrate our anniversary with us. I felt an instant chill at the oddness of it all. Then, it happened so fast I could barely piece it together. Nick was on me before I could react, throwing a punch that sent me staggering backward. I scrambled to defend myself, but he was relentless, a flurry of fists and insults I could barely understand. Somewhere behind me, I could hear Ella yelling, but she wasn't telling him to stop. She wasn't calling for help. She was laughing. The betrayal hit harder than his fists. This was the woman I'd built my life with, and she was standing there, watching as this man assaulted me in my own home on our anniversary. When it was over, Nick stood there, a twisted smile on his face, as if daring me to do something. I was too stunned, too hurt, emotionally more than physically, to even form words. He glanced at Ella, giving her a look that only made my stomach turn, and without a word, she took his hand, leading him upstairs, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what should have been our celebration. The house felt so still, almost eerie, once they went upstairs. My ears were ringing, and I could still feel the throbbing ache from where Nick's fists had landed. But that was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. My wife, my Ella, was up there with him, knowing full well what that would do to me. Knowing that I was here, listening, shattered. I just sat there, frozen in disbelief, as muffled sounds drifted down from the bedroom. Each sound felt like a knife, twisting, deepening wounds I hadn't even known I could feel. It was surreal. I was in my own home, and yet it felt like I was a stranger, an outsider in the life I thought I knew. Part of me thought about storming up there, about yelling, about demanding answers. But another part of me, a quieter, heavier part, just couldn't move. I was weighed down by shock, betrayal, and a sinking sense of humiliation. I tried to make sense of it all, tried to connect the dots of how we'd ended up here, but there was no logic in what she'd done. No reason that I could understand. Time moved in slow, painful increments. I don't know how long I sat there, numb and staring at nothing, waiting for them to finish. I don't know why I stayed, why I didn't leave, or at least try to clear my mind. Maybe some part of me was hoping that Ella would come down, look me in the eyes, and say it was a mistake, that she'd lost her mind temporarily, that she was sorry. Anything to ease the unbearable weight crushing down on me. But when they finally came back downstairs, There was no apology, no remorse in her eyes. Just a cold detachment, as if I were an afterthought, a nuisance she could barely tolerate. Nick smirked as he left, glancing back at me like he just won some twisted game. And as the door closed behind him, I was left alone with Ella, and with a silence that felt as loud as a scream. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, filling the room with a kind of weight that made it hard to breathe. I stared at Ella, waiting for some explanation, some spark of humanity that would make her realize how much damage she'd just done. But she didn't look at me. She busied herself with her phone, her fingers tapping casually against the screen, like I wasn't even there. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. "Why, Ella?" My voice was hoarse, quieter than I wanted, but it was all I could manage. "Why would you do this? On our anniversary, of all days. Why him? Why this?" She looked up, her expression unreadable, like she was sizing me up, deciding how much of the truth I could handle. Her eyes, once so familiar and full of warmth, felt cold and distant now. I didn't recognize this version of her. She just shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Nick, he makes me feel alive. I don't know how else to explain it." Her words hit me like a slap. Alive? Wasn't that what we'd built together? I thought back on all the memories we'd shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the plans for a future that seemed so bright. But none of that seemed to matter now, not when she was looking at me like I was an obstacle, something she'd outgrown. "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. "You've always had me, Ella. I've loved you, respected you, tried to be everything you needed. How could that not be enough?" Her gaze softened, just for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she was about to say something real, something that would give me some clarity. But then, just as quickly, the wall came back up. She sighed, as if this conversation was an inconvenience. "It's not that you're not enough. It's just different with him. He's spontaneous, wild. He doesn't try to fit me into some perfect box." Perfect box. The words stung, and I could feel anger rising, hot and unchecked. "Ella, we've built a life together. A home. We've shared everything. And you're telling me you threw all that away for someone wild? For some thrill?" She rolled her eyes, her lips curling into a faint, almost mocking smile. "You wouldn't understand," she said, brushing past me like she couldn't even be bothered to explain herself fully. "You've always been so predictable, so steady. I need more than that. I deserve more." There it was, the truth. She wasn't just dismissing me. She was outright telling me that our life, our marriage, wasn't enough for her. Everything I'd worked to provide, every moment I'd tried to make her feel loved, supported, cherished, it was all just predictable to her. I felt a raw, bitter anger coil in my stomach, twisting into something I didn't even recognize within myself. "So what now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you planning to keep seeing him? Or am I just supposed to pretend none of this happened?" She shrugged again, a nonchalant, careless gesture that made my blood boil. "I don't know. We'll see," she replied, like it was some casual decision, like she hadn't just shattered my world with her betrayal. "I didn't expect you to react like this. Maybe I thought you'd, I don't know, fight for me." I felt the last bit of patience slip away. "Fight for you?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You brought him here. You let him hit me and then you went upstairs with him. And you expect me to fight for you after that?" She met my gaze, finally showing a hint of something other than apathy. Annoyance, maybe, or frustration. "Well, maybe if you'd been a little less focused on your perfect life and more on me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." Those words, her twisted justification, broke something inside me. Whatever was left of my love for her felt smothered by the weight of her betrayal. I could feel myself pulling away emotionally, detaching from the woman who was once my whole world. "I'm done, Ella," I said quietly, each word coming out like a promise. "I don't know who you are anymore, but this person, she isn't the woman I married. And I'm not staying here, pretending like everything's fine while you do whatever this is." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but I didn't stay to see it. I turned, grabbing my jacket, and walked out of that house, feeling like the life I'd known was slipping away with each step. The drive felt like a blur. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away. Each passing streetlight cast quick flashes through the car, illuminating my hands shaking on the wheel. I tried to steady my breathing, but the whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, humiliation, made it impossible. I was in shock, a kind of numbness settling in, but beneath it was a storm that was only getting stronger. After driving aimlessly, I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet park. The place was deserted, just a few trees rustling in the cool night air. I sat there, staring at nothing, trying to process the chaos that had erupted in my life. How had everything crumbled so quickly? Just that morning, I'd woken up feeling grateful, ready to celebrate our anniversary. And now I didn't know if I even had a marriage left to save. I thought back to all the memories we'd shared in this car, the late-night drives when we were young, talking about our dreams and our future. Those moments had felt so real, so solid. But now, looking back, they seemed like a distant dream, one I couldn't get back to, no matter how hard I tried. My mind kept going back to her words, the things she'd said about me being predictable and steady, as if those were faults instead of virtues. I'd always thought that stability was what we both wanted, that building a life together, having each other to rely on, was the foundation of a strong marriage. But apparently, for her, it had become a cage. I sat there in silence, replaying every argument, every moment in the past year where she'd seemed distant. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The nights she'd come home late, claiming she'd been with friends or had to work overtime. The way she'd pull away from me, the look of irritation on her face when I'd try to talk to her. I'd chalked it up to stress, to the natural ebb and flow of marriage. But now I could see it for what it was. She'd already checked out. I felt a sharp pang of guilt, wondering if maybe I had failed her somehow, if my attempts at stability had blinded me to what she really needed. But then I thought of Nick, the man she'd let into our home, the man she'd let lay hands on me, her husband. Whatever had been lacking in our marriage, nothing justified that kind of betrayal. I took a deep breath, clenching the steering wheel as anger rose up again, hotter and fiercer. She had watched, laughed even, as I was humiliated in my own home. The depth of her cruelty, the disregard she'd shown, was something I couldn't ignore or forgive. I realized in that moment that this wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies or explanations. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed, breaking the silence. The sound felt grounding, like a reminder that life was moving forward, even if mine felt shattered. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it all settle in. I had a choice to make now, one that would change everything. I could go back, confront her, try to make sense of the senseless. Or I could accept what she'd shown me tonight, that the woman I'd married, the woman I'd loved and trusted, no longer existed. In her place was someone who saw me as a nuisance, someone willing to tear me down for her own satisfaction. The realization left me feeling hollow, but with it came a strange clarity. I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be without pain. But if I was going to move forward, I had to let go of the past. I had to let go of her. With that thought, I turned the key in the ignition, ready to go back to the house one last time. Not to make amends or ask questions, but to take the first step in reclaiming my life. As I pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisted, the anger giving way to a strange kind of calm. It was the calm that comes when you know a storm has already hit, and there's nothing left to lose. The house loomed in front of me, once a symbol of everything I thought we were building together, now just walls and windows holding memories that felt tainted. Inside, Ella was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her as she scrolled through her phone, looking as relaxed as if nothing had happened. She glanced up briefly when I entered, but didn't say a word, her face a blank mask. It hit me, standing there, that she felt nothing. No shame, no guilt, no regret. This was just another day for her. Another night she was content to end with silence. I walked in slowly, each step heavy. I'd practiced what I wanted to say in the car, over and over, but now that I was here, words felt pointless. How could I explain the hurt, the betrayal, to someone who had watched me break without flinching. But I had to say something. I had to make her understand. "I just need you to know one thing," I started, my voice steady but barely above a whisper. "I loved you, Ella. Truly. I thought we were a team, that whatever happened, we'd face it together. But tonight you showed me that I'm alone in this, that I've been alone for a long time." She rolled her eyes, a look of mild annoyance flashing across her face. "You're being dramatic. It's not like this was a big surprise," she replied coolly, crossing her arms. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention, you'd have seen it coming." Her words stung, sharper than I could have imagined. Any lingering hope that she might show remorse crumbled right then. Her tone, her attitude, they confirmed everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry, not in the slightest. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. "Well, I see it now," I replied, nodding slowly. "And it's going to change. I'm done pretending this is a marriage, Ella. I'm done holding on to someone who's already gone. Tomorrow, I'll start packing, and I'll move out as soon as I can." For a moment, a flicker of something, surprise, maybe, crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. "So that's it? You're just going to run away?" "Run away?" I shook my head, a sad smile forming. "No, Ella. I'm setting myself free. Staying here, clinging to someone who doesn't respect me, that's running away. I'm choosing to face reality, to build something new. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her expression hardened. I could tell she wasn't used to this side of me, wasn't used to me standing up, drawing a line. In her eyes, I'd always been the predictable one, the steady one. But even steady people have limits. "Do whatever you want," she muttered, rolling her eyes again. "It's not like I need you here anyway. Maybe this will be good for both of us." I took a final look around the room, at the walls covered in pictures from trips, holidays, and anniversaries that had once felt like the milestones of a shared life. Now they just felt like relics, remnants of something I couldn't reclaim. Each photo was a snapshot of happiness I no longer believed in, a reminder of the trust I'd poured into someone who'd crushed it without a second thought. I turned back to her one last time. "I'll be out by the end of the week. After that, consider this my goodbye." There was no point in waiting for her to respond, so I headed upstairs, determined to make the break as clean as possible. As I climbed the stairs, the weight on my chest lifted slightly, replaced by a strange sense of relief. I'd been clinging to an illusion, but tonight had ripped the mask away, and I was finally seeing things as they were. It hurt, yes, but there was freedom in it too, a chance to start over, to find something real again, even if that meant being alone for a while. When I reached the bedroom, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a long, unsteady breath. I was leaving behind a life, but maybe, just maybe, I was finding myself. The next morning, the weight of everything hit me as soon as I opened my eyes. For a split second, I almost forgot, the way you do after a nightmare. But reality came flooding back, and I knew that today was the day I had to start letting go. I went downstairs and found Ella already gone, leaving no note, no indication of where she'd be. Part of me was relieved. It was easier this way, easier to pack up my things without the tension of her presence hanging over me. But another part of me, the part that had spent years building a life with her, felt the ache of finality. She was already moving on, barely looking back, while I was left to sift through the remnants of a marriage that had once meant everything to me. I started in our bedroom, opening drawers and closets, pulling out clothes, books, and mementos from a life that felt like someone else's. Each item brought back a memory. My wedding suit was the first thing I found, neatly tucked away at the back of the closet. I remembered the look on her face when she'd seen me in it for the first time, the way her eyes had filled with tears as we said our vows. I'd felt like the luckiest man alive that day. Now, holding it, I felt a hollow emptiness, as though I'd been living in a story that someone else had written. As I packed, I stumbled upon little things that caught me off guard. A movie stub from our first date, buried in a drawer. A note she'd once left me on a sticky pad, saying she'd miss me that day. Photos of us grinning in places I'd carefully saved for so we could visit together. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of a life, fragments of love I'd poured my heart into. And now, They felt like artifacts from a time that had disappeared. One by one, I placed them in a box, unsure of what to do with them. Part of me wanted to throw everything out, to erase every trace of her. But another part, a quieter, sadder part, couldn't bear to. It felt like losing these pieces would mean losing years of my own life, like discarding memories that had once been real, even if they'd been one-sided. I continued packing, mechanically at first, until I opened a drawer and found an old, worn-out journal. It was one I'd given her the year we got married. I'd written a note on the first page, encouraging her to fill it with dreams, hopes, and memories. She loved to write, always scribbling down thoughts and plans for our future. Flipping through the pages now, I saw how that had changed. The first few entries were full of excitement, plans for our future, places we wanted to visit, thoughts on starting a family. But as I moved through the pages, her handwriting grew sparse, the entries shorter, less optimistic. By the end, the pages were blank. It was as if she'd slowly given up, a silent withdrawal that I'd missed entirely. The realization hit hard. I'd been so focused on keeping things stable, on being the provider and the constant, that I'd overlooked the signs of her drifting away. I couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere along the line, we'd both failed each other, trapped in roles we thought the other needed us to play. After hours of packing, I closed the last box and looked around the now-bare room. The walls, once filled with our photos and keepsakes, looked empty, almost unfamiliar. The life we'd built together was packed into a handful of boxes, each one a reminder of what I was leaving behind. I carried the boxes downstairs, loading them into my car. With each trip, I felt a mixture of pain and relief. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the person I'd been, the man who'd believed so fiercely in us. But as I took a final look at the house, I felt a strange kind of hope, too. I was free now, no longer tethered to someone who couldn't see my worth. And maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild from here. Driving away from that house was surreal. I watched it grow smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the life I'd known for so many years. Part of me expected to feel some overwhelming relief, some sense of freedom now that I'd left. But instead, I felt hollow, like I'd left a piece of myself behind. That house was more than a structure. It held my past, my dreams, and every plan I'd made for our future. And now, I was setting off into the unknown with nothing but a few boxes in my back seat. I drove to a friend's place across town, a guy I hadn't seen much since I got married. He was one of those people who never seemed to settle down, always living in the moment, always saying yes to life. I used to envy that about him, his ability to just pack up and go. But as I knocked on his door, it felt strange to be seeking refuge here, in his world of constant change, when I'd once built my life on the opposite. When he opened the door, he took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Come on in, man," he said, his usual grin replaced with a rare look of seriousness. I hadn't told him much over the phone, just that I needed a place to crash for a while. He didn't ask questions, just offered me a drink and told me to make myself at home. As I settled onto his couch, I let out a long sigh, my whole body feeling heavy. I stared into the distance, not really seeing anything, just lost in thought. The reality of my situation, leaving my home, my wife, everything I'd built, was settling in, and it felt like trying to breathe with a weight on my chest. Finally, he broke the silence. "So, what happened?" The words felt stuck in my throat, but I forced myself to start. She cheated on me. And not just that, she brought him to our house, to our anniversary. Each word tasted bitter, each one a reminder of the betrayal, of how far she'd gone to humiliate me. He shook his head, his face twisting with anger. "Man, that's messed up. I can't even imagine. But you did the right thing leaving. You don't deserve that." I nodded, trying to believe it. Logically, I knew he was right. But emotions are never as simple as logic. There was a part of me, a small, stubborn part, that still wanted answers, that wanted some explanation that would make sense of the chaos. "It's like, I keep asking myself what went wrong," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What did I miss? Was it my fault somehow?" My friend placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze firm. Look, maybe things weren't perfect. Maybe there were problems neither of you saw or talked about. But that doesn't make it okay for her to do what she did. Don't shoulder all the blame, man. She made her choices. His words offered a small comfort, like a bandage over a wound that was still bleeding. But they couldn't erase the memories, the endless stream of thoughts about what could have been. I just feel so lost, I admitted. I built my whole life around her, around us. And now, I don't even know who I am without that. You'll figure it out, he said, with a confidence I couldn't muster. It's gonna take time, and it's gonna hurt. But one day, you'll look back and realize this was the best thing that could have happened to you. I wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to that hope. But sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of my old life packed into boxes, it felt impossible to imagine a future without her. I'd spent so long envisioning a life together that I didn't know how to picture one apart. That night, as I lay on his couch, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of everything pressed down on me. I'd made the first step, but the journey ahead felt dark and endless. All I could do was take it one day at a time, hoping that somewhere down the road, I'd find a way to make peace with the pieces of my broken heart. The following days passed in a strange haze. I moved through each one mechanically, unpacking at my friend's place and finding a rhythm that resembled normalcy, if only on the surface. I'd wake up early, take a shower, force myself to eat, and fill my time with anything that kept my mind off Ella. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but I was learning to live around it. Then, one evening, I received a text from her. Just seeing her name on my phone brought a rush of emotions, a painful reminder of everything I was trying to forget. Her message was short, almost clinical. I'd like to talk. There are things we need to discuss. I stared at it for a long time, torn. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to cut her off completely, but another part, the part still craving closure, needed to know what she had to say. Finally, I agreed to meet her, telling myself it would be a chance to take control, to hear her side and finally, perhaps, close this chapter. We met at a coffee shop we used to frequent. The familiarity was painful, a reminder of simpler times, but I steeled myself. She arrived looking as put together as ever, almost indifferent, like she wasn't about to confront the wreckage of our marriage. She sat down, a hint of discomfort crossing her face as she avoided my eyes. I wanted to explain, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I just needed something different. I felt trapped, suffocated. I thought you'd be able to move on without me, that you'd be fine on your own. Her words hit like a punch. There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the devastation she'd left behind. Just a twisted justification, an attempt to explain away her choices. I realized then that I'd been hoping for remorse, for some glimmer of the woman I'd loved. But this version of her, the one sitting across from me, was a stranger. I don't need an explanation, Ella, I replied, my voice barely hiding the anger bubbling beneath. I just needed you to respect me, to respect us. But I see now that was too much to ask. She looked down, her face impassive. I'm sorry you feel that way. It was a dismissal, and I felt a sudden clarity, a sense of liberation. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her approval or her validation. She'd made her choices, and now, finally, I was making mine. Without another word, I stood up and walked away, leaving her in that coffee shop, closing the door on a chapter that no longer held any meaning for me. Leaving that coffee shop felt like a victory, a small but powerful reclaiming of my dignity. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself in a way I hadn't in years. I joined a gym, started reading more, and reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over time. Slowly, I began to rebuild, piece by piece, discovering who I was outside of our marriage. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest, the silence a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. But each day, the pain faded a little more, replaced by a sense of strength I hadn't felt in years. Then, one day, I found myself laughing, genuinely, freely, at something small and silly. It was a revelation, a glimpse of the person I was becoming. I wasn't healed, not yet, But I was on my way. Out of the blue, Ella's family reached out to me, inviting me to a family gathering we'd planned months before. I almost declined, but then I realized this was another opportunity to close a door, to say goodbye not just to her but to the life we'd shared with her family. At the gathering, there was an initial awkwardness, but they embraced me warmly, expressing regret for what had happened. It felt strange to share laughs and memories with people who had once been my family, but it was also healing. I left that day feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected, knowing that I didn't have to cut everyone out of my life because of her choices. As months passed, I began to feel more like myself. I rediscovered old hobbies, took up new ones, and learned to find joy in small things. I no longer defined myself by my past or by the pain that had once consumed me. There was a life beyond her, and I was living it, slowly but surely. One night, at a friend's party, I met someone, a woman with a warm smile and a laugh that was contagious. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope, a reminder that life could still hold new beginnings. One day, months after our last meeting, I received a letter from Ella. She apologized, genuinely this time, for everything. She admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd taken me for granted. But instead of reopening wounds, her words brought closure. I realized I no longer needed her apology. I had moved on, found peace within myself. Her letter was just a reminder of how far I'd come. Starting to date again was challenging. I was cautious, guarded, but determined not to let my past dictate my future. Slowly, I learned to trust again, to open my heart to the possibility of love. Each small step felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a victory over the fear and doubt that had once held me back. Years passed, and life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. I found someone who valued me, who saw my worth, who respected the love I offered. We built something beautiful, rooted in trust, honesty, and shared dreams. Looking back, I saw my journey with Ella as a chapter in my life, one that taught me resilience, strength, and self-worth. I no longer harbored resentment or regret. The man who had once been broken, humiliated, and lost had grown into someone stronger, someone capable of love without fear. The pain, betrayal, and heartbreak had shaped me, but they didn't define me. I had taken control of my life, and for the first time in years, I was truly free.